The big government progressives in both the Democratic and the Republican parties have been trying to trick us. These folks who really want the government to care for us from cradle to grave have been promoting the idea that health care is a right. They have succeeded in moving the debate from whether the feds should micromanage health care to how the feds should micromanage health care. This is a false premise, and we should reject it. Health care is not a right, it is a good, like food, like shelter, and like clothing. Okay, what's a right? A right is a gift from God that extends from our humanity. Thinkers from St. Thomas Aquinas to Thomas Jefferson to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. to Pope John Paul II have all argued that our rights are a natural part of our humanity. We own our bodies, thus we own the gifts that emanate from our bodies. So our right to life, our right to develop our personalities, our right to think as we wish, to say what we think, to publish what we say, our right to worship or not worship, our right to travel, to defend ourselves, to use our own property as we see fit, our right to due process, which is fairness from the government, and our right to be left alone are all rights that stem from our humanities. These are natural rights that we were born with. The government doesn't give them to us, and the government doesn't pay for them, and the government can't take them away unless a jury finds that we have violated someone else's rights. What is a good? A good is something we want or need. In a sense, it is the opposite of a right. We have our rights from birth, but we need our parents when we are children, and we need ourselves as adults to purchase the goods we require for existence. So food is a good, shelter is a good, clothing is a good, education is a good, a car is a good, legal representation is a good, working out at the gym is a good, and access to health care is a good. Does the government give us goods? Well, sometimes it takes money from us and gives that money to others. You can call that taxation or you can call it theft, but you cannot call it a right. A right stems from our humanity. A good is something you buy or someone else buys for you. Now, when you look at health care for what it is, when you look at the U.S. Constitution, when you look at the history of human freedom, when you accept the American value of the primacy of the individual over the fleeting wishes of the government, it becomes apparent that those who claim that health care is a right simply want to extend a form of government welfare. Now, when I make this argument to my big government friends, they come back at me with, well, if people don't have health insurance, they will just go to hospitals and we'll end up paying for them anyway. Well, why should that be? We don't let people steal food from a supermarket or an apartment from a landlord or clothing from a local shop. Why do we let them take health care from a hospital without paying for it? Well, my big government friends contend that's charity. Well, they're wrong again. It's impossible to be charitable with someone else's money. Charity comes from your own heart, not from the government spending your money. When we pay our taxes to the government and it gives that money away, that's not charity, that's welfare. When the government takes more from us than it needs to secure our freedoms so it can give some of that money away, that's not charity, that's theft. And when the government forces hospitals to provide free health care to those who can't or won't care for themselves, that's not charity, that's slavery. That's why we now have constitutional chaos, America, because the government steals and enslaves. And we outlawed that a long time ago. So I'm surrounded with three very, very intelligent economic minds here. Nitpick what I just said. Is health care a good or is it a right, Mr. Varney?
Well, that was a very articulate statement of the libertarian position, if I may say so.
Nice
good for you, Judge.
That.
And I agree with you. When health care is considered a product like any other, a good, in other words, it is delivered efficiently in a competitive environment at a low price. It's efficiency. When healthcare is considered a right, it becomes inefficient, bureaucratic. It is delivered by the government, and you interfere with the very concept of freedom. Individual freedom for the liberty, for individuals, liberty for the individuals, versus so-called group freedom, which never works.
Can the government possibly deliver any product fairly, whether it's healthcare and Medicaid or Medicare or Social Security or the post office or the Amtrak train you just were on when you came up from Washington, D.C., with which it is unlawful to compete?
No, it cannot, and for obvious reasons. When a business fails, it is starved of capital. When government businesses fail, they are handed more capital. So there's no incentive to bring a good product. Healthcare is definitely a good. It's not a right, but I know that if in fact it were made, if it's made a right, I will have my constitutional right not to be thieved from erased, essentially.
Professor Salerno, you're one of the leading free market economists in the country. Why is it that people don't understand that private enterprise, that competition can always deliver something better, whether it's shoes or health care, than the government can deliver it?
I think part of the reason is that we've been bombarded with this idea that greed is what is behind competition. Greed is what is behind capitalism. And in fact, greed is simply self-interest. You're interested in yourself and your family and your community, and so that you don't want government getting involved in an essential service like health care. In fact, all the government does is centrally plan things, and we know with the fall of the Berlin Wall 20 years ago what central planning has led to. Chaos.
But let's not forget the politicization of a service when it's delivered by the government. It is delivered under political circumstances. It is delivered to political constituents who are chosen to be preferentially treated.
Great point, Tammany. That's why when the government owns General Motors, the chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, Barney Frank, can call the government-installed chairman of General Motors and say, don't close that GM warehouse in my district. We have to run these government-owned businesses on a political rather than a business model.
And here lies the problem with governments investing or bailing out companies. Once you take government money, you are no longer in the business of profit. You are serving political masters who don't care about profit, just social ends. And so invariably it leads to failure. I'd be scared to drive a GM car in the coming years.
Isn't GM virtually doomed to failure because it will serve its political masters? It has no investors, and it doesn't even care about consumers because the feds will just keep pouring money into it.
That's correct, Judge. In fact, what should have happened is that GM should have been allowed to go bankrupt, and its assets that were valuable should have been sold off to entrepreneurs that could have used them to greater benefit to consumers.
I know where we're going with this. I know I'm about to disagree with
go right ahead and disagree. When Lehman Brothers fell and the great British bank Barclays bought the good parts, that was a good thing, and the rest just disappeared. What's wrong with that?
I don't think it was a good thing. I think Lehman should have been saved. I approve
by the taxpayers?
Yes, I approve of the government stepping in that kind of extreme crisis. Now, I know I'm going to disagree with you, gentlemen.
That's why you're here.
But I think it was the right thing to do, and it stopped us having an absolutely terrible global meltdown. Paulson did the right thing. Okay, it was messy. We all understand that. We ended up with a huge bill. Got it. But I don't want to see 25% unemployment, which we would have had if you'd have had 15 Lehmans that same weekend.
You disagree with that so much you won't even get in a GM car while the government owns the company that makes it.
I heartily disagree with Stuart. First of all, banks are too important to save. They're far too important to the economy to do that. Secondly, what we got, the end result of this, were politicized entities that will never be strong. Lehman was not going to disappear had it failed. It was going to be taken on by better owners. When markets are cascading, that is a signal that they are being cleansed of bad business ideas. Don't intervene.
Professor Salerno, how could the government possibly decide who to save and who to let die on the vine?
They can't. That's a political decision. We saw with Japan in 1980s, their industrial policy was supposed to make them even stronger. People were afraid of Japan Incorporated. Bottom line is that model, that industrial policy model, failed miserably because they were trying to pick winners and losers, and governments cannot do that.
The banks are separate and different because they are at the crux of a modern financial economy. Banks have the money. They're not like General Motors. I agree with you entirely. General Motors, let them fail. They make cars, for heaven's sake. But you don't let all of the banks fail at the same time.
Well, what would happen if some of the banks had failed? Wouldn't the good parts have been sold and been operated more efficiently, and the bad parts, like whatever happened to the parts of Lehman that were unprofitable, just go away?
Wait a second. No, but most companies step in.
Hang on, Stuart.